In this video, I'm going to go over informal fallacies of logic. These are basically some easy mistakes that we can make in logic that we want to avoid. And for the purposes of your first quiz, what you're going to do on here is going to be to recognize the examples. So you don't need to commit all these to memory. And of course, the first quiz is going to be open book, open note. So you can have your notes and stuff right by you as you're going through the first quiz. Let's get into it. So the first one I want to go over is the fallacy of equivocation. This is the illegitimate switching of the meaning of an ambiguous term during the reasoning. So, for example, listen to this argument. I say a feather is light. What is light cannot be dark. A feather cannot be dark. That sounds like it should work. The problem here is that the meaning of the word light has changed between the first premise and the second premise. In the first premise, it's referring to weight. In the second premise, it's referring to photons. In English, at any rate, it's an ambiguous term, and I've switched it over the course of the reasoning. This was kind of a silly example, but sometimes if people are using a term that can have different definitions, and people talk about it, then this kind of confusion can happen. This one can happen quite a bit. Here's another one. Informal fallacy. Argumentum ad hominem. Literally, an argument to the man. I prefer, like, attack of the person. That's not what it literally means. Literally means just argument to the man. That's when an irrelevant attack on the arguer is made that is supposed to suggest that this attack undermines the argument itself. So what you do is you just make fun of the other person. So the example I have here is people who use ad hominem fallacies are idiots. A lot of people use them. A lot of people just start making fun of other people. Politicians do this a lot. Well, this person's an idiot. You shouldn't trust what they say. Well, maybe, but that doesn't actually have anything to do with the point that they may have been making. You can call someone an idiot all you want. For example, I think the most famous version of this is the story of the boy who cried wolf. Like, well, he was a liar. He kept telling people there's a wolf there, and there wasn't. And then in the end, the moral of the story is, if you keep lying, then when something really happens, people won't believe you. That's a fine moral. But that last time, in the boy that cried wolf, the boy cried wolf, like, hey, there's a wolf, and the first 10, however many times, there wasn't, but the last time there was, even though he had lied those first 10 times, that last time, there really was a wolf. So just saying, oh, this person's a liar, doesn't mean that they're lying now. So we need to look at what people actually say, and not merely have problems with the identity of the person. There are certain senses in which we can have a probabilistic understanding. This person's consistently lied, so it's probable that they're lying now, but again, not with necessity. So just making fun of people saying, oh, this person's stupid, or they don't know what they're talking about, or they didn't major in this, or what have you. They don't have the background to be able to make this kind of proclamation. So maybe they're wrong, but maybe not. Making fun of somebody doesn't get you anywhere. Similarly, there's the Quoque fallacy, where you just say, yeah, but you did it. So that's when someone, when they're receiving criticism from one view, rather than address the criticism that receiving, brings up something that you did. Yeah, well, you made a mistake. If you've ever had an argument with a significant other or a parent, you've probably had this kind of fallacy before, where you're saying, hey, here's what you did here. This is a problem that's going on. I want to address this. And someone says, yeah, but you did this. You did this. The example I have, Anna says eating meat is bad for the planet. It produces methane and so forth. But she eats meat, so I guess it must not really be that bad for the planet then. I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to make fun of Anna's inconsistency, but that doesn't negate her point. Even if she's inconsistent on it, or she did something where she made a mistake, that doesn't mean that she's wrong just because she's inconsistent. This is another form, basically, of ad hominem, where you're making fun of somebody. And another form of ad hominem is the straw man fallacy, where basically, this is where you attack a misrepresentation of your opponent's view. So you say, oh, these people believe this. So you construct like a made-up version of what somebody's saying, where it's not really what they're saying, but a made-up version. And then you basically try and beat it up, and you're like, I beat them. But no, you didn't beat them up. You beat up like literally the mannequin version of their argument. So consider this. I've heard this one before many times. Charles Darwin said that humans evolved from monkeys. Yet there are still monkeys, so the theory of evolution is obviously false. It's a misrepresentation. It's a straw man fallacy, because nowhere did Charles Darwin say that humans evolved from monkeys. He would say that apes and monkeys share a common ancestor with human beings, so they have a shared common ancestor. He never anywhere said that we evolved from monkeys. That's a misrepresentation of Darwin. That's the problem here, is that you think you've beaten something by not talking about it or not articulating it correctly. These next two fallacies are very similar. Secundum and Simpliciter. They're both fallacies of generalization, where you take like a group phenomenon. They're both fallacies that actually come out of induction, and you take a group phenomenon and basically screw it up somehow. So in Secundum, which is sometimes called a hasty generalization, it comes from a Latin phrase, addicto secundum quid addictum simpliciter. Basically, you take one statement that works to something where it doesn't work. That's where you take a couple of instances and you say this must be the truth. So consider this argument. It rained on my birthday this year. It rained on my birthday last year. Ugh, it always rains on my birthday. Well,
Maybe if you're 2, this works, that is 2 years old, but I know it can feel that way, like something always happens. People do this all the time when like they get stuck in traffic. Oh, I always hit a red light. Probably not if we added up every single instance. But what you do is you take a couple of instances and you try and generalize from those instances and you say, therefore this rained on my birthday last year, rained on my birthday this year, it always rains on my birthday. Well, what about your other birthdays before that? Now, if we can come up with a comprehensive list where every single time you've had a birthday it always rains, then maybe we could say that. But then we still don't even know from your future birthdays. Will it always rain on your birthday, even after you're gone? That's the Secundum argument, where you take a couple of instances and you say, well, from these couple of examples, this must always be true. And this is also the stereotyping fallacy. That's literally what's happening in stereotyping. Like, these couple of instances were true, and then you take these couple of instances and you say, well, therefore, from these couple of instances, it's always true. Nope. Secundum fallacy. Simpliciter, this one's rarer, but occasionally happens. I just want to bring it up. It's kind of the inverse of that. So simpliciter is short for addicto simpliciter addictum secundum quid. What happens here is basically one takes a general rule of which there's an exception and then tries to stuff the exception into the rule. So, for example, listen to this argument. Birds can normally fly. Tweety the penguin is a bird. So I say Tweety the penguin can fly. No, Tweety the penguin cannot, because penguins are birds, but not all birds can fly. But I've already said birds can normally fly, so, well, because birds do that, then this bird must be able to do that, so that's what all birds do, right? So this bird should be able to fly. Doesn't work here, and the fallacy is the simpliciter fallacy. So the next fallacy I want to go over is argumentum ad ignorantiam, or argument from ignorance. So what happens here is, basically, you take not knowing that a statement is true is taken as proof that it's false, or not knowing that a statement is false is taken as proof that it's true. So in short, absence of evidence is used to justify evidence of absence. So consider this example that I have here. While it has been proved that the surface of the moon is not made of green cheese, we have not proven that the core of the moon is not stuffed with barbecued spare ribs. Therefore, hey, the moon is stuffed with barbecued spare ribs. And if you're like, that's ridiculous, well, you can't disprove it. How do you know they're not there? Argument from ignorance. That's the fallacy. Like, maybe we'll dig into the moon and we will find that it's stuffed with barbecued spare ribs. But just saying that you haven't disproven it doesn't make it true. Where this happens is often in theological arguments. Someone will say, hey, you haven't proved that God exists. God doesn't exist. Argument from ignorance. But also, you can't say you haven't proven that God doesn't exist. So because you haven't disproven it, therefore he does exist. Both of those would be arguments from ignorance for the exact same reason. You're taking like the fact that something hasn't been proven or disproven as making it obvious that the opposite case is true. That's an argument from ignorance. There might be good arguments to get you there, but that, as it is, does not get you there. That's the problem with an argument from ignorance. It's not what is being said is true or false. It's that this argument saying, well, you haven't disproven it, or you haven't proven it, just saying that doesn't make something true or false. Argumentum ad Verecundiam. This is appeal to authority, or argument to the respect. This is where you say, just because someone's authoritative in something, they must be authoritative in something else. So there are legitimate reasons to actually use this. So let me explain how the fallacy is different from appeal to authority. So like if I'm looking at something in biology and I'm looking at what renowned biologists say, this is not an example of this. Okay, so appealing to a particular authority. Or even if I'm looking at something in theology and I say historically people have said in theology this, I'm looking at authorities. But if I say, oh, you know what, here's something in social psychology that my mechanic said. Now listen, the mechanic might not be wrong, but just because they're an authority in one thing does not mean they're authority in another thing. We see this a lot where celebrities will say things about politics, maybe. Just because someone's a celebrity, just because they're good at acting and they're good at music, but it doesn't necessitate that just because somebody's popular in something, that they must necessarily be good in something else. If your physician says something, take their advice when it comes to stuff that has to do with your health. If your psychologist or your psychiatrist says something when it comes to your mental health, listen to what they say. If your mechanic says something with your mental health, maybe they're right, but just because they're your mechanic doesn't make them right, just because of that one expertise in one thing. So again, the fallacy here is the misapplication. Just because, oh, this person's good in this thing, they must be good in this other thing, necessarily. They might be, but it doesn't follow with necessity. The next two are kind of cousins of each other. Petitio Principii and Circulus in Probando. Both of these are examples of circular reasoning, where you're basically saying the same thing twice. I distinguish between them by saying begging the question, or Petitio Principii, is where you're already proven what you want to say, therefore you're not proving anything, and it's kind of implied. You're kind of hiding it in begging the question. So, like, consider a defense attorney saying this. The defendant, my client, is innocent of the crime. You ask, why are they innocent? Because they're not guilty. Well, if they're not guilty, then we might have other evidence to support that. Like, they might have an alibi, they might have other kinds of evidence saying what else is going on. But just saying, my client is not guilty, because they're innocent, and they're innocent because they're not guilty. I'm just saying the same thing in different ways. I'm kind of twisting or hiding, but I'm saying the same thing, so therefore it's implicit. But that's what I'm doing. I'm arguing in a circle. I haven't said anything new. I haven't proven anything. I've just kind of said two different things. That's begging the question. We use the phrase begging the question to mean like it makes us think about asking this question. That's something that we say, but that's not the fallacy. On the other hand, Circulus and Probando is where literally circle in the proving is where we're not even trying to hide it. So we say something like this: murder is morally wrong because it's wrong. So it's wrong. It's wrong because it just is because it is. Circular reasoning. And there it's explicit. I'm not even trying to hide that I'm arguing in a circle. Something's wrong because it's wrong. It's right because it's right. It's good because it's good. It is what it is. All that circular reasoning because I'm not even trying to do a little bit of a switcheroo like I did in begging the question. I'm just saying the exact same thing over again. And therefore the problem with it is, with the fallacy, is the thing I'm trying to prove is what I've already assumed. And what I've assumed is what I'm trying to prove. So I haven't got anything new. I've just argued in a circle. Let's look at false dilemma. This is where one presents a dichotomy, or like a false choice between two scenarios. Now we could have a false trilemma, we could have a false quadrilemma. This is where someone says it has to be one or the other or some other option. Like here are the options when other options are available. So let's say Bob went down to the corner store to pick up some Miller High Life, and then Bob's missing, which we haven't heard from him in an hour. And so we go, Bob's dead, or he's been abducted by aliens. Maybe he is dead. Maybe he got into an accident on the way home. Maybe he has been abducted by aliens. Or literally anything else. And so that's what a false dilemma is. A false dilemma is where you say, like, well, it's got to be one of these two things happen. Or something else. And that's the problem. You make it a couple of positions when it could be more positions available. Argumentum ad logicam. And this one's similar to the Quoque from earlier too. This is where you say, hey, someone else committed a fallacy, so I don't need to listen to what they say because they messed up. They made a fallacy, so automatically everything they said is wrong. That doesn't follow. Someone can make a fallacy and still be correct in what they're saying, even though they made a mistake getting there. So consider this conversation. Carlo says, you cannot borrow my car because it turns back into a pumpkin at midnight. Evelyn says, if you really think that, you're an idiot. And Carlo says, that's an ad hominem fallacy. So that means I can't be an idiot because you're wrong, and when you're wrong, it means I'm right. And Evelyn says, I beg to differ. So yeah, just because someone else makes a logical mistake doesn't mean that because they made a mistake, therefore everything that they said is wrong. They made a mistake in getting there, but that doesn't mean that the conclusions are mistaken. Like if I said 2 + 2 = 4, therefore today is Sunday. Today is Sunday, at least at the time of me recording this. That doesn't mean that that argument got me there, but just because someone made a mistake, or let me say 2 + 2 = 5, therefore today is Sunday. That's not true, so today can't be Sunday because you messed up. Nope, that doesn't follow. Ignoratio Elenchi. Literally that means irrelevant conclusion. This is where you bring up something else altogether that has nothing to do with what's going on. It might seem like it in the moment. Like, consider this conversation. Sydney asks the question, is it illegal to park here? And Jennifer says it should be. Maybe it should be, but is it illegal to park here? Yes or no? And someone's brought up something else. This happens a lot when people ask like a moral question, like, oh, someone did this in this situation. Is this the right thing to do? And someone says, oh, well, I would do it in that situation. Okay, you would do it. That doesn't answer whether or not it's right or wrong. It's completely irrelevant. And whereas the others that I've mentioned have had Latin phrases, that's actually a Greek phrase. Let me also be clear here with the informal fallacies. You don't have to memorize the Latin or the Greek phrases. I just want you to recognize the examples. Next two are similar to each other. Argumentum ad Antiquitatem, literally the argument to the old. Literally appeal to the antique. This is where you say, well, just because we've always done something, we should be doing it that way. The example I have, people have been learning how to write cursive long before we started typing all the time. Therefore, the education system ought to spend more time and energy on cursive instruction. This is something I could not disagree with more. Like when I was in elementary school, we all had to learn cursive. Is it important? I don't see how. The only reason I can think it's important is to then figure out how to read cursive in historical documents. But since so much of the way that they wrote cursive, say in the Declaration of Independence, is very different from how we learned cursive when we were younger, it's really not that helpful. But just saying, well, basically we've always done something this way, so we should always do something this way because that's what we've done. Maybe a more tactile example of this would be like, oh, the way that you put the dishes in the dishwasher is the way that it has to be done, and someone else, your partner, puts the dishes in the dishwasher differently, and you say, can't do it that way because it's different, so it's wrong. Argumentum ad Antiquitatem. Similar argument would be argumentum ad populum. This is sometimes called the bandwagon fallacy. This is just because this is the peer pressure fallacy. This is because a bunch of people are doing something that therefore it makes it true, just because a bunch of people are into it. So in this one, the example I have, and I'm thinking of like a news commercial for the local news. Channel 6 is the most watched news channel. So you picture like the meteorologist like looking at the weather and then laughing. The sportscaster catching a football, then laughing into the camera. The newscaster like shuffling papers right before they say something. And then it says, everyone should watch Channel 6 News. Maybe we should, but just because everyone's doing it doesn't make it true. This one is kind of grounded on the principle that sometimes people say like, oh, millions or billions of people can't be wrong. Yes, they can. Just because a lot of people are into something doesn't mean that something is true. Argumentum ex silentio. This is an argument from silence. And this is just because something is not said, we assume that, well, because they didn't say so, it must be true. So this happens sometimes in like courtroom cases. And here's the example I have. A detective and a suspect are talking. The detective asks, did you murder the victim? The suspect doesn't say anything. Well, you didn't say no, so that means you're the murderer. Is it possible? Sure, it's totally possible. Does it follow with necessity? Because someone doesn't say anything, like when I ask, are you the murderer? And you say no. Sometimes this can be related to the fallacy of, which I don't have articulated here, but the fallacy of a loaded question. Let's say if someone is very peaceful, hasn't ever done anything, a detective asks you, so how long have you been beating your wife? And you go, and you don't say anything. Oh, so I guess you must have been doing it for a long time. Argument from silence. Don't mix it up with the argument from ignorance. A little bit different. So go back and look at that one too to make sure you don't mix those up. Now, for the purposes of the quiz, you just need to make sure you know the examples. Argumentum ad misericordiam. Literally, argument to misery or pity. This is where you support a conclusion by making someone feel bad. So this is emotional manipulation. So someone might do this to me. Please don't do this. But I've had this happen before. So let's say someone says, if I don't make an A in this class, I won't graduate. I won't be able to find a good job, so I deserve an A in this class. Listen, maybe you do from the work that you put forth. Just because you're trying to make me feel bad about it doesn't make it true. So if you've ever heard someone say something like, if you really loved me, you'd do this. Please love me. If you really love me, you'd do that. Argumentum ad misericordiam. That's what it is. Don't fall for it. These next two are very similar. Fallacy of Composition and Fallacy of Division. They're basically inverses of each other. Fallacy of Composition is where you say that what's true of a part is also true of the whole. That doesn't always work. So listen to this argument. Atoms are not visible to the naked eye. You can't see them. You can't see electrons, protons. Even if you're looking at water, like I'm looking at a bottle of water right now, I don't see the hydrogen atoms floating around. I just don't, because they're not visible to the naked eye. Then I say something like, oh, people are made of atoms. They're comprised of atoms. And then I say, well, wait a minute. Atoms are not visible to the naked eye, but people are made out of atoms. People are invisible. Fallacy of composition. So what's true of the part is not necessarily true of the whole. Then fallacy of division is kind of the backwards version of that. What's true of the whole is not necessarily true of the part. So I say here, like, the city of Aiken, South Carolina has several golf courses and horse tracks. It does. If you look at a map of Aiken, you'll see all these little circles for horse tracks. You see all these little splotches of green. They're either places for horses or places for golf. We got a lot. Here's Abby. She's someone who lives in Aiken, South Carolina. And you've seen this kind of stuff happen before where someone says, oh, you're from Aiken. You must love golf. And when's the last time you rode horses? And Abby says, I don't do either one of those things. Okay, maybe she does. But to assume just because she's from Aiken and golf and horses are big in Aiken that she therefore does these things, that doesn't follow. Because just because what's true of the whole of Aiken, like Aiken is a town that's all about horses and all about golf, doesn't make it true of the individual components or citizens who live there. Doesn't mean that everybody plays golf. USC Aiken's in Aiken. Doesn't mean everybody's a student at USC Aiken. That doesn't follow either. That would be a fallacy of division. Slippery slope. This is where one assumes that if something happens, then something else will happen. So you should not do the first thing because the second thing will happen. But what makes a slippery slope is where you say you don't say how they're connected. So it's perfectly legitimate to say, hey, if we do this one thing, it will lead to something else. That's not slippery slope. But I'll hear people say this all the time. People will say one thing, go, slippery slope, it'll lead to the other thing, without showing how it leads to the other thing. So sometimes people will say something like, I don't know, people paying less for their prescription drugs, slippery slope to communism. Maybe it is, but you haven't showed how those things are connected. And that's what the slippery slope fallacy is. Here's an argument I've heard before. So someone might say, if homosexuality is normalized, which was in the past considered a deviant behavior, if you look at DSM-2 in the history of psychology, it was considered a deviant behavior. It's not now, nor do I think it should be, but it has been considered that in the past. So someone says, if homosexuality is normalized, bestiality will eventually become normalized and legalized. So homosexuality ought not be normalized, because if that thing's allowed, then the other stuff will be allowed. That doesn't follow. The reason why it's a slippery slope argument is you haven't shown how one thing leads to another thing. Maybe it will. I think it's a ridiculous argument. But someone might say, this one thing leads to this other thing. Well, show me how it gets there. So the slippery slope fallacy is simply you don't connect the dots. That's the problem. It's not that you say one thing will lead to something else. It's that you say one thing will lead to something else without showing how. That's what makes a slippery slope a slippery slope. Then post hoc ergo propter hoc, sometimes post hoc ergo propter hoc, depending on how you want to pronounce your Latin. Sometimes this is called after this, therefore because of this. That's literally what the Latin means. Sometimes this is called correlation does not equal causation, especially in the social sciences. This is where you assume that if one thing happens, then another thing happens. The first thing must be the cause of the second thing. Listen to this argument. The number of pirates in the world has decreased over the last 4 centuries. Now, when I say pirates, I'm talking classical pirates, wooden leg, eye patch, parrot on the shoulder, pirates of the Caribbean. There are fewer pirates in the world today than there were in the past. Also, last 4 centuries, the temperatures in the world have gone up. So I say, this thing happened, the temperature increased, they must be connected. So I say, pirates cool the earth. The number of pirates went down, the temperature of the earth went up. There must be a connection. That's the fallacy. You say there must be a connection. And so here, correlation doesn't equal causation. You take 2 things that happen in the world and you say they must be connected somehow, even though you have no way of demonstrating their necessary connection. Maybe somehow pirates do cool the earth. Maybe they do, but you haven't proven it. And that's what makes these informal fallacies fallacies. It's not that your ultimate conclusion is wrong. It might be true. It's that it doesn't follow from what you're saying. It doesn't follow with necessity from what you're saying. No true Scotsman. So this is where you say, basically keep coming up with a special, your own version of a definition to make something work. So consider this conversation between Elijah and Brianna. Elijah says, hey, are you a fan of Michael Jackson's music? And Brianna says, oh yeah, I love Thriller. And Elijah says, oh really? If you're such a fan, then name every song on the album Thriller. To which Brianna responds, let's see, there's Thriller, there's Pretty Young Thing, there's Billie Jean, there's Bad. And Elijah says, nope, Bad's not even on that album. It's on the album Bad. And Brianna's like, well, that's all I can think of. And Elijah says, well, you must not be a real Michael Jackson fan because you obviously are not able to tell these albums apart. And Brianna says, I am. I know all the lyrics of these songs. No, Elijah says, a real Michael Jackson fan would have been able to list every track on that album in order. According to whom? According to Elijah. So what Elijah's doing is coming up with a special definition here of what it means to be a Michael Jackson fan. People do this all the time with fandom. So people say, in order to be a fan of something, you got to be able to do this, 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 and this. Okay, whether it be music, whether it be sports, whether it be art. Like, oh, I like Van Gogh paintings. Oh, yeah? Name 10 of them. Oh, I don't know if I could name 10. Well, then I guess you're not really a Van Gogh fan. Or, oh, I see that you're wearing an Atlanta Braves hat. Can you name any member of the Atlanta Braves before 1996? Can you name their averages? Oh, you're a Colts fan. What was Peyton Manning's passer average in 2006? Oh, you can't do that? Then I guess you're not really a Colts fan. All that kind of stuff right there. No true Scotsman. Because what you're doing is you're saying, oh, a specific definition of what I think it means to be something, well, it must be that thing because I said so. Not because of any definition that exists out there, but simply because you said so. This comes up a lot in terms of gender debates. Oh, here's what it means to be a man. Think tough. Don't cry. That's what it means to be a man. According to whom? Me and my dad. Men don't cry. Well, I know a man and he cried. Well, then he's not a real man then. No true Scotsman fallacy. You're taking a definition that you kind of made up and you have no real reason to stick to it, but you keep sticking to it just because. And that's what the fallacy is there. So again, with all these things, with the fallacies, with the examples that I have, what I want you to do for the quiz is be able to recognize the fallacy. So if you saw this conversation between Elijah and Brianna, I might say, was this example of A, equivocation, B, no true Scotsman, C, composition, D, Antiquitatem, and you go, hey, this is an example of a no true Scotsman. That's what I expect you to do here on that first quiz, not to commit all these to memory. What I'd like you to do practically is to, next time you look at people saying things, is to apply these. But at least for the grading purposes of this course, I want you to be able to simply recognize the examples and what they refer to.